Hello, everyone, and welcome to IBÁñEZ. While this month is Black History Month, and I will upload in the coming weeks my last two videos on Black History, today in my home state of Georgia, things are slightly different. Today in my home state of Georgia, it is the official holiday called Georgia Day, which celebrates the founding of the colony of Georgia, which of course would eventually become the state of Georgia under the United States. What I want to cover today on this day that was obviously only important to Georgia is the um, important figures other than James Oglethorpe, who is the British general who founded the colony, who also helped make sure the colony was present and was founded. And that is Tomochichi and Mary Musgrove. A Creek chief and a Creek businesswoman who helped found the colony of Georgia alongside James Oglethorpe. As I said, James Oglethorpe, the figure on the left, is the most well-known figure behind the founding of Georgia, as he was given permission by the British king in 1733 to found the colony of Georgia. And while he certainly deserves the credit for founding Georgia, the other individuals, such as Mary Musgrove and Tomochichi, who were involved in it, are very little known, if known at all, outside of the original cities and major political centers of the colony of Georgia, such as Savannah and Brunswick and things such as that. So, who are these figures? Well, Mary Musgrove was a Creek woman. She was the daughter of a British businessman and a Creek citizen. And she generally grew up in what we know as modern day Alabama and Georgia and parts of Florida. What we at the time was at the time the Creek territory or Muskie territory, as Muskie is the proper term for the Creek, as the Creek was a confederation and it was made up of various different tribes who spoke the Muskie language. And she was indeed a citizen of this tribe. And she also spent quite a lot of time around the closest British colony, South Carolina, which is how she met the man who would eventually become her husband, John Musgrove. She also became very closely tied with one of the major industries of the time, the fur industry, specifically the deer fur industry, which was a very sought after fur. I mean, the Cherokee up in North Georgia and Tennessee and such participated in it, as well as other tribes. And it could be used to gain a lot of wealth and a lot of other goods, such as in the left picture, you see the Creek individual purchasing a gun in lieu, thanks to the deer furs. And you can see over on the right, the Muskegee weighing the deer furs for trade in a trading post. And so it was through this contact with this fur trade that she began to become a businesswoman in her own right. And she did this a number of ways. One, marrying her husband, John Musgrove, but also just simply being a very sound businesswoman herself without her husband. So while the husband helped, I don't want it to be thought that she only gained her money by marrying her husband. No, she was very much a powerful woman and a very smart business person. And this is how she and her husband were able to gain their wealth and continue to trade deer furs in Creek territory. And it was due to this connection to the Creeks and also the connection to the British that John Musgrove and Mary Musgrove were eventually approached by General James Oglethorpe. This was for a number of reasons. One, she already had contacts, obviously, with the various Creek tribes, especially the main political figure in the area he was seeking to settle, Tomochichi. But also, she could speak both English and Muskogee, which was a very common practice throughout European colonialism, having a American Indian translator to help negotiate deals. Mary Musgrove filled this position. And she had, as I'll cover a little bit later, already been in contact to at least some degree with Tomochichi, as Tomochichi was also connected to the fur trade. But he was the main political leader who basically held into the balance whether or not James Oglethorpe could settle where he wanted to settle. And the only way he even got to do that at all was because of Mary Musgrove, who helped negotiate the settlement for James Oglethorpe to purchase the land, which actually also heavily benefited her. Because after the founding of the colony of Georgia, Mary Musgrove founded her own trading post on the Savannah River and immediately began to make even more money off the fur trade. Now, it's important to note trading posts were a common practice of Europeans in Indian Territory, where the French, Spanish, and British and Dutch would venture out into American Indian Territory, such as the Cherokee Territory, the Natchez, the Choctaw, etc., and the Muskogee Creek Territory, and build trading posts where they could trade furs to both the American Indians and other fur traders, and also process the furs that they hunted out in Indian Territory. And so, by setting up this trading post in this new colony, Mary Musgrove was taking advantage of a new market place that had opened, and was putting herself even more on the forefront of the fur trade. Then eventually she became caught up in a land dispute over 3 islands where she and other Creek Indians were supposed to be given rights to three islands, Sapelo Island and St. Catherine's Island included. But the British Crown also wanted them, and they didn't want to give the Muskogee, especially Mary Musgrove, this land. And this dispute went on for years, with neither side getting what they wanted and nothing really getting anywhere. Eventually, Sir Henry Ellis, a British politician, was able to settle this and was able to end this, years-long dispute by giving Mary Musgrove 2,100 pounds and also exclusive rights to St. Catherine's Island. In exchange for these, she gave up rights to Sapelo and the other island, whose name is escaping me, and I apologize. So therefore, she gained even more money than she already had, and gained sole rights to an entire island for her to make use of. So, very wealthy Creek woman who held a lot of political sway at the time. And she was so important and so foundational for the creation of the colony of Georgia, as well as the development of the fur trade in Georgia. In 1993, she was given a after the grave, posthumously, the Georgia Women of Achievement Award. So she was put on the Georgia Women of Achievement. So she truly is integral to Georgia's history. But as I said at the beginning of this video, she's not the only individual who is also integral to the founding of Georgia. There is this individual, Tomochichi. Tomochichi was the powerful chief of the Yamakra branch of the Muskogee Indians, the Creek Indians, who ruled much of eastern, what was modern day eastern Georgia. And he was born in the 1730s-ish, and 1630s-ish. My fault. 1640s-ish. And he grew up to be very powerful, and actually, as shown on this map, he took a lot of slaves because he benefited from the, unfortunately, the American Indian slave trade. In fact, documents talk about this, where he sold many, at least a few hundred Appalachie after the Appalachian War, as well as other tribes. But he didn't just do that. He also had deep connections to other tribes outside of South Carolina, outside of Georgia, such as the Yamasee in South Carolina. And he made quite a few alliances with other tribes. Unfortunately, this alliance came crashing down in 1715 with the start of the Yamasee War. The Yamasee had allied with the British in the Tuscarora War, and after defeating the Tuscarora, the Yamasee decided they knew enough of how the British fought, and started their own war, which went very well until the Cherokee joined the war on the side of the British. And so with the defeat of his allies, the Yamasee, Tomochichi was in a very, I don't want to say very, but he was in a somewhat weakened state by the time of 1717. But he quickly saw a way out of this situation. And that was with James Oglethorpe. So when James Oglethorpe approached him with Mary Musgrove, he, while he was still in a weakened state, he had all the power. This site you see here is modern day Savannah, Georgia. And at the time, before the founding of Savannah, Georgia, this was called Yamakra Bluff. And Tomochichi moved to this area to gain political power because there were many Mississippian mounds in the area. So it was understood that he moved there, and even quoted in the accounts that he moved there to gain spiritual and political power from his ancestors. And so when James Oglethorpe appeared and offered to settle a colony here, and having heard of the power of the British, Tomochichi immediately jumped on board, and immediately saw the potential for these powerful new allies. And so he gave him permission to settle the British colonists here on Savannah, Georgia, and create the colony of Georgia. Became a long-standing ally of the British government. So much so that he actually, in 1734, went overseas with James Oglethorpe to meet Parliament in Britain and declared his eternal friendship to the British Crown, as well as the British Crown declaring eternal friendship to Tomochichi and the Yamakra, which he then proceeded to use this event to garner even more political power over the other Creek tribes once he got back to Georgia. Because again, this is important to remember. While he gave away Yamakra Bluff, the place he had come to in order to gain political and spiritual power, he gained a lot more, at least in his eyes, by giving it away. In fact, one could even argue, though he does not say this, and the accounts don't say that he thought this, one could argue that this could have been seen as the result of him harnessing the power of his ancestors. I mean, another thing to note based off of this is many academics have noticed that he may have been trying to position himself into a sort of paramount chief position, such as seen in the Powhatan Confederacy and the Mississippian chiefdoms a century or more earlier. And it generally seems that was what he was trying to do, especially positioning himself in an area where Mississippian mounds were, to try and harness the spiritual power and political power of his ancestors. So one could argue it worked. And this was further helped by the fact that James Oglethorpe ventured with Tomochichi inland to what was the Creek town of Coweta, and helped negotiate more deals and helped negotiate other issues with Tomochichi. So Tomochichi gained even more political help by harnessing this. Oftentimes it's considered medicine of a sort, by harnessing the medicine of his ancestors. The American Indian medicine is something different and would require a whole video that I, as a generally Scandinavian descended person, though my father is Cherokee, I'm 98% white, would not be able to discuss in great detail, as it's not my culture. But either way, he harnessed that medicine and gained a lot of power from it. And unfortunately, in 1736, Tomochichi died of old age and had a large rock interred on his grave near Savannah, Georgia, of which now there is a plaque that had been placed by the Georgia government later on in honor of him. And when he died, he left his nephew, Tunahawi, in charge. Now, one would expect that maybe this was the end of Tomochichi's helping of the founding and survival of Georgia. Really, no. Even after death, his legacy continued to help Georgia survive. And a lot of this has to do with events happening in what was called the War of Jenkins Ear. So the War of Jenkins Ear was a war within a war. It was sort of a war within the War of Austrian Succession, but it was also a war between the British and the Spanish over who had rights to set up markets and such in the New World. Specifically, the British wanted the rights to set up markets in the Spanish part of the New World. So they started a whole war over it. But dang, the war is called War of Jenkins Ear. If it's called, why is it called that and not the War of the British wanting to set up trading posts in Spanish territory? Well, Jenkins was a real person, and he was a British sailor who had his ear chopped off by Spanish who boarded his boat in search of contraband and other items. But his ear was chopped off 8 years before the war even began, and when it happened, really no one cared. What happened is when the War of Jenkins Ear was picking up and was about to begin, the British carted him around and used him basically as a scapegoat to rally people behind them so that they could start the war. So this poor guy had his ear chopped off and spent 8 years with nobody giving a crap, and then suddenly he's being used as a scapegoat by the British government to start a war over whether or not somebody could build a grocery store, essentially. Yeah, but needless to say, this war did go on for about 8 years, and spent most of its time in South America and Central America, but eventually the Spanish did decide to invade a British colony, specifically the colony of Georgia. Because of the increased warfare with Spain, James Oglethorpe very astutely decided to build several forts along the Georgia coast, including one of the largest, Fort Frederica, in 1742. And this is where the Yamacraw Creek under Tomochichis' nephew, Tonohawi, come in. So, around that time, in the 1742, the Spanish began to invade Georgia, and they were able to march fairly deep into Georgia territory, where they eventually skirmished with British forces and scared them back to Fort Frederica, because the British militia were relatively untrained. They were, shopkeepers, they were blacksmiths, they weren't professional soldiers. However, there were quite a lot of American Indians, as well as Scottish and German, specifically Scottish Highlanders. So when the Spanish began to approach Fort Frederica, a battle called the Battle of Hole Creek happened, where Tonohawi and his Creek warriors, the German mercenaries, and the Scottish Highlanders marched out and fired a little bit at the Spanish, but then charged, from what the accounts say, screaming at the top of their lungs, into Spanish formations, were able to drive them off. So the victory of the battle was in very much large part thanks to the presence of the Yamacraw Creeks. This momentum was continued then in what eventually became known as the Battle of Bloody Marsh, in which case the Creek warriors, the Scottish Highlanders, the German mercenaries, and yes, the British militia chased down the Spanish into this area and defeated them very handily, and permanently drove Spain out of Georgia. Now, they didn't know this at the time, and there were increased defenses and such in fear and anticipation of a second Spanish invasion, but it never happened, and Georgia was permanently safe from foreign incursion. So, this Creek presence is the reason, granted not all the reason, but is the reason Georgia was not conquered by Spain. And that is why Tomochichis' legacy continues, because it was the leadership of his nephew, whom he personally chose to be his successor, that's helped save Georgia. So, did any of you who are watching learn any of this history in school? Because I truly didn't, and it's a travesty that these two individuals, who both helped found Georgia and helped save Georgia, albeit from the grave, are not entered into the realm of Georgia or even U.S. history more than they are. So, with that, I hope you enjoyed learning something new and learning about these two very interesting and important individuals. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I hope you all have a good day.